Hello everyone, my name is Ray Konopka, and in this session we're going to take a detailed look at how to skin our VCL applications using VCL Styles. So there's really only two main parts. I don't have a lot of slides, but I just wanted to provide some direction. The first part of the session will be talking about how to apply a VCL style. That is, how do we skin our applications to give it a different look and feel and styling without having to change the underlying code. And then we'll talk about how we can dynamically change the styles and so forth. And then at the second part, we're going to take a closer look at how do we create our own custom VCL styles. So to apply a VCL style, it is project-wide. So we're going to use the project options in order to make the different setting changes that we want. And as we'll see the example in just a second, we're going to specify which styles we want to use, embed those into our application, and be able to use them. So let's take a look at what that's all about. So here I have Rad Studio 10 Seattle loaded with a test application. It's pretty straightforward. It's just a standard app. It's a bunch of different VCL controls that are positioned on it. There's in the constructor, the form create event handler, I populate some of the fields, and there's tree views, and the list views got some data and so forth. And so what I want to do is simply, if I go ahead and run this, it looks like a regular Windows application. Nothing too fancy. We've got hot tracking, the different styling that's used for the buttons and the progress bars and so forth. What's nice is that we can very easily change this app to use a different VCL style. And we do that by going into the project options, the application, and down to the appearance. And the appearance is where we now get our title, and the most important piece here is the custom styles box. And as you can see, that Embarcadero provides a number of different styles by default in with Rad Studio, and so we can pick out like amethyst here, and let's go with a charcoal. Emerald light states, not too bad. We can even go with iceberg. What's kind of neat is if you click this and then you get a little preview button, you can see a sample of what that style might look like. And I can go and add a whole bunch of things. I can add in this obsidian. And let me go back and I'll add in the new Windows 10 styles that were created. And then once I add in all the styles that I want, I can go ahead and pick which one do I want to use. And so if we start with that one, I will go ahead and click OK. Go and now run my application, and we can see that our application looks quite a bit different. We've got rounded tabs. They're styled differently, different coloring throughout. Buttons have a default state of orange, as well as when the hot tracking. Notice how the track bar looks different. Of course, the radio buttons and checkboxes are all styled according to the VCL style. Now, what's really nice is that I can dynamically change the style as well. So I've added a little combo box to facilitate that. When I drop this down, here are all the styles that I added in. So if I go in and change to the emerald light style, you'll note that the window kind of disappeared. The whole window gets recreated so that the new styling can take effect. And I can go and change it to the iceberg classica, which is what I showed before. That has the kind of the blue crisp look for all the different elements, yellow highlights for certain things. Let's take a look at, say, you can always get to the Windows one. That's your original Windows look and feel. But we can go back to, say, Obsidian, which is a darker style, although white window contents. And let's go to a Windows 10 version. And so we've got a traditional Windows 10 looking setup, the new checkbox styles and so forth. Well, let's get one of the darker ones. Here's the blue one, blue content. Notice how our tabs are all changed. And then the final one is the dark style that we have access to as well. So a couple things that we want to dig into a little bit deeper with respect to this is, well, okay, how do we dynamically change, populate the combo box, for example, and what else can we do for this? So let's take a look at the code. And there's a number of controls and things that are used, but there's really very little code into the application. The first thing that we do is we call init controls, which is simply a helper that populates some of the dynamic content, the tree view and other items, and that's just down at the bottom there. To populate the styles combo box, we use the T-Style Manager style names property, and it's a list, and the Style Manager is accessible from the VCL.themes unit, and this gives us access to all of the styles that have been loaded as resources into our application. So we can simply iterate over that list of style names and add each name to our combo box. And then the active style name, the active style is whatever style is currently active. We get the name of that, which is the actual visual name that we would call it. That's the lavender and the obsidian and the Windows 10 dark and so forth. We can set the item index to that particular name, so our combo box gets updated right away. When we go and make a change in the combo box, our change event gets fired, and here we're taking the text that represented the name of the style and passing that to the T-Style Manager set style. And this is what causes the new style to be applied to all of the controls and forms that are in the application. One of the things that I should point out, let me run my application again here real quick. And over the years, the styles were first introduced in XE2, and they've been enhanced and improved each successive version. One of the new additions in Rad Studio 10 Seattle is the ability for the common dialog boxes to be styled as well, and this wasn't always the case, but now it is, and it's quite elegant to be able to have a very consistent user interface using the styles. So that's the open dialog, even the print setup dialog, all the common dialogues now will pick up the same visual styles that were being used. And if I go and change this to, say, the dark style, go back in and bring up the print setup dialog now matches that as well. So that was one of the new changes in 10 that I wanted to emphasize. And now the Style Manager also allows us to dynamically load a VCL style. And a VCL style is defined in a .vsf file, and we'll look at how to create those in the second half. But we can deploy those as individual files as well. So I've taken the Onyx Blue, and I'll show where all these exist in the repository of those on our developer machines go. But if I wanted to dynamically provide a style to a user, I created a new one and I wanted to deploy it but not rebuild my application, we can load the style file from disk. Obviously you'd have to provide that and make sure it's accessible on the path. But I've done that. It's in the same directory as my executable. So I can load up that style. Now once I do that, I can also set my style to this new name, which was be defined in that VSF file. So if we go and run my application again, and I've tied it to this particular button. So if I go ahead and load, this is the new Onyx Blue style that's available. And so a darker style, and settings, button highlights, and so forth. So kind of neat. All right. Let me go back to the slides and take a look at a couple things, make sure that we didn't miss any things. Again, the Style Manager, VCL themes, we want to be able to get a list of all the style names, which works really well. I've already shown that. Some additional notes to emphasize here. It should be noted that all of the forms and controls will use the same style. However, there is a certain amount of customization at the control level that you can do through what's called the style elements property. So let's go back to our app and we can take a look at that. And I have an example on my style elements tab here. And what this is doing is I have a panel, and normally when I would drop a panel down, it's going to pick up the it'll essentially be transparent when I've got the theming and the styles, and I can't really change it. That's the style defines the panel's behavior. However, if I want to change this, so let me run the application, you can illustrate this. So notice how it picks up whatever color the style is, and if I change this to iceberg, then it looks like the same iceberg coloring, which is, even if I were to change the color of the panel from button face to say yellow, I'm going to lose that setting when I run with the style. So to overcome that, you use the style element property, and in particular for this one is to take off the client. So I want the component to use its own property values rather than the style values to do the client display of this panel. Now when I go and run this, regardless of what theme and style is used, I can colorize the panel appropriately. So, but it should be noted that at all of your forms will use it. You can't have one style used for your main form and have a different VCL style used for your child forms. It's system or application wide. I wrote selection color here because you may have noticed that the selection color doesn't really change. This is the actual text selection, like a list box selection, the edit box, the memos and so forth. When you select text, that's all controlled by Windows and the display of that, and so Microsoft doesn't provide any hooks in order to change that, and so it's only that will always be blue. It's one of the kind of the deficiencies, limitations that we have to contend with. Menus are styled. This wasn't always the case. It's been improved. However, there are situations where your menus might disappear, and the best way to describe that is to show an example. So let me switch back to the IDE here, and let me go back and start with, I'll set up my startup to be Windows. And we'll go ahead and run this. And one of the things that I've done is I have a main menu that's got images associated with the menu items. And I have a new menu, submenu to create, mimicking the IDE, to create a new VCL forms, unit, and so forth. And there's a reopen menu as well. Well, one of the things you can do with a toolbar, the T toolbar and T toolbar button, is that I can associate the button with a particular menu, and in this case I want the new subcomponent menus to show up, and so it's very convenient to be able to do that and strip off or pull out a set that's in there. However, if I go and change my style here to something else, at the main level, I still have all my imaging and menus and so forth, but if I go down and drop my little cascading menu, I don't have any images and I don't have any text. And the reason that this happens, it can also happen for if you were to build a component. I have a pop-up menu that I've set up, and it has to do with if the menu items that you create are not owned by the form, then the styling engine has an issue when your menu has images associated with them. So as a way to work around it, if we go into the code here, to either dynamically create the pop-up menu, which is what I was showing on that panel, if I don't associate the images with it and rerun it, and if I go to my notes, you can see that, okay, that's what it looks like on the Windows side. And if I change it to, say, Iceberg Classico, I can still see the items. But if I add the images back to it, the text and the images goes away. And so if I'm back here, great, that's what it's supposed to look like on Windows. I took up, another style, my iceberg, and then they're all gone away. Now, the problem, I had control over this pop-up menu because I was dynamically creating it. That's not quite so simple with respect to my main menu, which has all the images associated with it. So one potential workaround is to get rid of the images part of it whenever my style changes. And so we can actually get a notification that the style has changed. And so here I'm going to uncomment another piece of code, and if I've changed to a custom style, then I want to clear the images that are associated with my main menu. And then but if I going back to a regular system level one, the Windows style, I'll go ahead and use the images. So if I open that up and change it, now change this to, say, my Iceberg Classico, you'll see that I do have my items, my images show, or my items show up, but I've had to remove all the images associated with the whole thing. So hopefully this won't be something that we need to keep in for the long term. But it does, at least it gives us a way to provide access to those menu items as well. So that's just something to keep in mind when you're dealing with menus. Let me just go back to my notes here. Next up, one thing to note is that it is possible that you might see a control that doesn't get fully customized when you're dealing with the style changes. Let me reset my little comment here so next time I do this I don't lose it. I'm going to pick my I'll go back to my my Emerald Light State one, for example, and I've got the button edit component here, and it looks fine with the way it's set up right now. There's a button image inside of the edit box there, and but if I go and change this to a dark style, we can see that the background of where the button is supposed to be is not painted according to the style. So if you run into something like this, it really is, make a note of it, contact the vendor that's providing the control, or whether it's a custom control, or maybe it's a third-party tool that you purchased, and then let them know, okay, I've used this style and this is the change that I made, and this isn't getting picked up correctly. But for the most part, the controls that are in the VCL all fully support the styles to a great extent. Now, one additional note that should be commented on is if you have any owner draw techniques, you've got a list box or a combo box and you've done owner draw coloring on those items, it's likely that those colors and things are specific to the version of Windows you're running. When you apply a style, you might run into problems. And that's where the style services object is very useful, because we can make calls to various functions like get system color that takes a system color value like CL button face and returns back the style equivalent of the button face color. So as far as your as your coloring goes, CL button face is what Windows thinks CL button face is, which is gray. That's the light gray color. But if I wanted to change this panel to be that, I need it to not be gray. I need it to pick up the color from the style. So to do that, I've done, it's right there, system color. What does this do? I'm actually setting the color of that panel to styles get system color of CL button face. If I don't do this mapping, then setting it to CL button face will be gray, which may look fine on some light colored styles, but will clearly be incorrect when you run a dark style like I just showed. So next up, we want to take a look at what is involved in creating a custom style. And to do that, it's fortunate that Embarcadero provides a tool to help us do that. It's called the Bitmap Style Designer, and we're going to use that to set up all the elements that we need, define ranges of where different portions of the control pick up its styling from, and then define a whole bunch of settings that support what the style definition is. Once we go ahead and save it, we can then use it inside the IDE in the application appearance settings like we did before. So I'm going to do two different style creations. We're going to look at a real quick color change example, taking an existing style, giving it a new color. Kind of easy to do because we don't have to make any of the detailed color modifications, and then or color settings. And then the second one will be a more detailed look at a really custom style. What are all the steps needed to do that? And we'll take a look at both. So back in the IDE, if I go to the Tools menu, I can pull up the Bitmap Style Designer, and it's a separate executable. And when you load it, there's a default style that is created, and we can get a feel for that by clicking on the opening up the objects and clicking on the form, and we can see that okay, this has this kind of gray style, circular, system buttons that are on the form. Button controls will look like this. It's a little confusing the way these, how does this actually define a style? Well, we're going to take a closer look at all of that in a bit. But one of the first places to check is if we can expand the images node here, and we get usually a PNG image. And this defines all the elements that make up the style. And so you can see that there's the form that's focused and the form that's not focused. You have the different states. So normally you have the normal state, the hot state, the down state, and the disabled state for various controls. So here's the versions for the push buttons, for example. This looks like tabs for a tab control or page control. Each of these different glyphs and images inside this encompassing transparent PNG are used somewhere for various control elements. These look like track, vertical and horizontal, and then all the thumbs that are in there. So one of the quick ways to change, to get a different look and feel, is to actually change the color of this image. And So let's do, we're going to take the default and go and export this. And I'm going to just type in development conferences, and we'll just put it in there. We'll export that out, close it, and I'm going to go navigate to that. And so here's the image that I created, and I'm going to open this with a painting program. You use Photoshop. I use Paint Shop Pro for some things like this. And what this will do is load up the image, and you can tell that it's transparent. That's the background. And I could go in and edit each of these individual things manually, and I'm not going to do that yet. Instead, you can use whatever effects and capabilities that you might have in your system. And what I'm using is just to be able to colorize an image, and I want to give it, say, an orange color. I need to bump up the saturation here and change my hue, colors, make it a little bit more orangey. Oh, there we go. All right, so I think that looks good enough. I can click OK, and I'm going to go and save that PNG file. Let me go and close that control. Now I have my image there. If I go back to my bitmap, I can now do an update on this. So I can go and pick up, let me go find where I put that. There's my new orange style. Now what's nice, this tells me that okay, is the mask still what you think it is, and for the most part you'll just always accept that. And what's nice is that I don't have to go back in and change the different elements for the button, for example. Like the button face, if we expand into it, it's got a bunch of different properties that represent where inside this image the button is defined. And so if you can see, there's the rectangle that represents this state of the button. That's the regular state. But if I go to the pressed version of the bitmap, notice how it's this next image rather than the top one that is being used. It's being extracted out of this bigger image to represent what that style is. And if I go back to my form, notice that the form now looks orange. So before I can do anything with this, one of the things that I recommend doing is go to the objects page, or the objects node, and select it, and then change up the settings that are in this value. There's a couple reasons for doing that. One is this is what gets displayed in the appearance dialog. So if I wanted to change this, I can make that there, and I can give it a new link. It's not a mobile platform. This same tool can be used for VCL styles as well as FireMonkey styles. They're similar in structure, but they are used in different purposes. So here I'm giving my VCL style a name. This is what would get passed to the set style of T-Style Manager. And so I'm going to give that a name so that it holds it. Now I can go ahead and save my style. And what's the key thing is, in order for the IDE to find it, you need to put it in the styles directory of the version of Rad Studio that you're using. Now I'm using version 10 Seattle, which is the 17 version. I'm going to put that into my styles directory here, and I'm going to call this Sunkissed. So we'll save that there. That's great. And now if I go to my project options, into the appearance and scroll my list down, I now see that there's a Raize Software entry with Sunkissed. So I can go ahead and select that, and I can even go and have it start up that way by default. Click OK, go ahead and run, and now I've got my Sunkissed orange style that's used. So very fast and easy to do a quick color change, which is how they've done most of some of the other color variations that you might see. Now, the couple things to note about that. My example here was really short to show you the major steps. However, there is still a piece that's necessary. I had mentioned the various elements inside here and how we didn't have to go in and edit each of the different pieces, like the group box and which sections of the main image that they're using for like the panels and so forth. So that was nice, that because I colorized the full image, all the settings for where it's pulling the elements, I didn't have to change that. However, there's these three other nodes that are listed here, and this is there's a fonts node, and the fonts tells us what colors to use and what style to use for the various elements in the VCL style. Now, what's kind of confusing is that the background fill of all of these is essentially the button. So when the button is pressed, that background is used, but what this is describing is what font is used in this particular situation. So if you want to make sure whenever you colorize the image, for example, if you took that and made a very dark image, none of these text elements would show up because they're all dark colored. So if you had a black colored buttons or a charcoal gray buttons, you'd be hard pressed to see those. It's also important to change the colors setting. Remember, this provides programmatic access to it. This is the default values. Notice how none of these are orange. These really should be orange colors. So I would go in and select this and pull up and click an orange color value to make those changes. And then maybe I need to highlight that and make it a little bit lighter so that it looks hot. So going through each of these pieces is important, because remember when we talked about owner draw, if we're using one of the system colors like the button face, well, the button face really shouldn't be gray. The button face should be kind of the orange color that was used inside the coloring. So we would want to make sure that those were picked up appropriately. So then once you make sure all those changes are set, you can go ahead and save your image. So a couple other things to note about the Style Designer, and let me just make sure. So I've saved that off. In the new pop-up, the drop-down menu, there are the default is to do a new VCL style, which is what I was showing. But they've added in the latest release here modern VCL style and modern dark. If we go ahead and click one of those, nothing really looks like it changed, except if we go to the image, we now have kind of the default light colored Windows 10 styling. And if we go and do another new and change that to a modern dark VCL style, open that up, and this is the dark variation of it. So we can start from any one of these and modify it as needed, or we can load up an existing style. So if we go and open it up, it goes to our default, and let's say we wanted to bring in the carbon version. If I click OK, open up the image, and here is the carbon version that you can see. Again, it's structured similarly, but not exactly the same. If you remember, the other ones had the buttons going across, these are going down, but generally the same formats pretty much used, but we don't have rounded corners, we've got squared off corners and so forth. If you're doing VCL styles, you're only going to start with the top 3. All of the rest of the items are for FireMonkey styles. So you can just ignore those for now for your VCL styling applications. So the next thing that I want to show or wrap up this session is a pure custom style that I created, and it looks similar, but to some of the other things. But it's inspired by a certain collection of photo and graphics, vector graphics design software. One, just really to extend to see just how much control that we have, what we need to do each of the individual elements. So structurally very similar to the others, but there are the tab styles are quite different. The way the buttons are highlighted, the check boxes and so forth are all there. This particular size is not needed. It was just a reference box that I used. The key though is because the sizes were all different, I had to go through each of the different items in here and pull out exactly where each one went. And so it certainly is doable. If we go into the button face, and like I showed before, you click on it, you pull out the right image. The one thing to note is definitely make use of the zoom feature. Use that quite a bit, and more importantly, that the bounds that you make are inclusive. What I mean by that is that this position, this upper left part that's on the dotted line, is included into the bitmap that is extracted. When I first did this, I thought it was just what's inside, and I couldn't figure out why I kept getting these transparent pieces coming into the styles. That's because I was going into the purple with my bounds. And so just remember that when you make the change. And it's quite cool. If you left click, you set the upper left. If you right click, it's the lower right. And so I would then reset this to there, a little too short, and then set this back down to here. Oh, too high. There you go. So you can make your changes and extract what pieces you want. Notice how it does the alpha channels around them to really give you control of what you want that button style to use. In addition to all of those, notice how the sample text colors have all been changed because it's a darker style, and so we need to be able to have lighter colored text in selections and so forth. The color values as well have all been updated appropriately, and including the system colors based on what we want to use here. Notice that these text elements are all lighter colored because we have a darker style. One area I didn't talk about is there's a test style button. So if I go ahead and click that, it gives you a big dialog of a lot of sample components that show the style being applied. And so you can see there's hot tracking that's built into all of them, very subtle and so forth. So let me go ahead and close this. And then I can go and let's see how this looks in our test application. Nope, don't need to modify that. Let's go ahead and go back into my project options. Scroll down to the list. I've added the Raize photo. Let's bring that one in and go ahead and run. All right, and switch over to the Raize photo, and here's what it looks like in our application as well. And so we have our tabs and we have our checkboxes and so forth. Again, the downside, the selection color is still the light blue, but the app is got a very nice and different look and feel for it. So that's all the information that I have regarding the VCL styles. The URL that's listed on the page there does have the sample test application as well as the custom style. So you're welcome to try that, look at how it was created, and experiment. The nice thing is that they're separate files. You can try things out, start with one, make a copy of it, and again, I recommend changing the name so that you can see it show up when you go into the appearance node in the options, and have fun with it. At this point, I want to thank everyone for joining and listening to the presentation, and I will now take part in the live Q&A. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Great. Thank you, Ray. Okay, so how do you select a circular area for like the radio buttons?
So the key thing to remember is that everything is a rectangle. So you're given 2 points when you make your selection to describe the bounds that are used. However, you can get circular images when you're using a PNG image as the background, as the base image. If you recall, it has all the widgets in it, and there's the grid that's in the background like a checkerboard. And that checkerboard pattern represents the transparent areas of the image. And that's why a PNG file is usually used, because one, it supports transparency where a JPEG does not, and it also supports alpha channels. And so when you're doing a circular radio button, for example, the border will use alpha blending to make it more anti-alias. It'll blend with the background, so it makes it more circular rather than pixelated. However, what you define as the image to use is always rectangular or square in the case of a circle.
Okay, that's good to know. In the style appearance dialog, there's a it says I missed the button for selecting all styles and one selecting. Oh, yeah, that would be nice to be able to select just one or all styles. Deselect all of them, select all of them. Okay, good suggestion.
Yep. Although the only thing I would add to that is that, and this touches on, I think, another question about if you prefer not to send out a separate style, do you have any good trick for including it into the executable? Well, the default is if at design time, when you go into the project options, into the appearance page, and you select the various styles in that checklist, those styles are included into the executable. They're not deployed as a separate file in with your executable. So the end result is that you don't have to do anything special to include the styles in your distribution. The key, though, is that because the styles have a large image and there's data that goes along with it, it does add quite a bit of space to your executable. So being able to, and I'm tying it back to the original question, which was having a button that said select all the styles, that may not be the best choice, simply because it's going to add a lot of extra space to your executable, occupying the style settings and the images. And not all of the styles, have the same quality that you may want with your app. And so I would recommend going through and picking the ones that you think will, lend themselves to your app being the most desirable and clean looking and so forth.
That's good suggestion. Alf's asking if it's possible to use one style in one form and a different style in a different form.
Unfortunately, I'm not aware of any way to do that. I know some people think when you're on the appearance dialog, making the selection, and then you go and pick a style and you pick the preview, that it looks like a form is coming up to show you what the style is like. But that's just a visual representation of the images that are stored in that style. It's not actually an interactive dialog. But the way the engine works is it hooks into the whole application, much like Windows itself. When you style or uses visual styles to get the modern day controls, you can't have one form showing the old Control 3D appearance and all the other ones using the newer styles. It's pretty much an all or nothing affair.
So how does styling work under the hood then? Can you go into that?
Well, it's normally, if you're just using, if you add an application manifest into your code, you'll pick up the latest version of the Common Controls library, and Windows will load that DLL up, and it will use the rendering for visual styles for your controls, and that's how we get the modern look and feel. And the IDE takes care of adding a manifest to bring all of that in by default, and the IDE now uses that same approach. The VCL Styles essentially leverages the same kind of technology, although it is all internal. It doesn't require the same engine. You can actually remove the application manifest from your executable and still enable a custom VCL style, and the style engine that's inside of the VCL.styles unit kicks in and will do all of the rendering for the various controls that are used. So it's quite sophisticated technology behind the scenes making all of that work.
Okay, very cool. In a multi-developer situation, if one developer creates a style, he has to give that file to the other developers. Is that correct?
Yes.
And then they would need to move it into that, if they're using like source control, move it into the styles folder.
Right, and if they're in order to use it, it would have to go into the styles folder so that the IDE would automatically pick it up. That's only if you want to do that, have that link in at design time and using the appearance folder to do that. If you want to have your application dynamically load the style, then you can put that anywhere you want. So it's not required that it has to go into there. If you are doing it doing it custom and you want to have it in source control, you're probably going to want to have it in your own directory structure that is part of source control. It's unlikely that you're actually adding the Embarcadero Rad Studio public folder of styles into your source control. Simply, it's not your project and so forth. So think of the styles directory as a way to use it, but it's not the home of it. And so I would have those, in your normal, development structure, add your source control to that and store that in your source control. And then when it comes time to use it, then you can add it into there if you need to.
Okay, good idea. Is there a performance penalty when using styles?
No, not that I have noticed. There's a hit when it comes to switching them. Obviously, it has to recreate the forms. But once it's up and running and all they're loading, I've not seen or noticed any performance change between just the normal rendering of the controls themselves.
Yeah, it would seem like that's if you're not using a custom style, it's already using a style. It's just not one you've defined. So.
Right, it's using essentially the one difference is the engine that's used to do it. One you've got Windows is taking care of extracting, because the way Windows itself works when rendering controls is essentially what I described in creating a custom style. Each element that is rendered on the screen like a button, there are images, transparent images inside of Windows, in the DLL, the visual style settings, that describe the various elements of that. It's the background, the different states of the image. The forms are done the same way, track bars and radio buttons, and all of those different images are inside a collection of states. And then the Windows rendering engine just extracts those and says, oh, you need to draw this, go and do this. It was much more obvious that was happening back in the Windows XP days when all this was first, established by Microsoft internally, as opposed to the old window blinds, which would do a similar type of thing externally. But you had the different colors. If you remember, there was the blue, the olive, and the silver color schemes. All of the only difference between those was that the different set of base images were used when you picked the color scheme, and the appropriate bitmaps images were used to display.
So Robert's saying he's not sure what's involved in lightening the font color when you make a darker overall style. You have to select each button state and change the font color of each one separately, or is there some more global way to do this?
So if I tried to touch on it, maybe I needed to go a little bit more in depth on it, but in the bitmap style designer, there's a lot of focus on the objects node and the images node. The image holds the main image of all the control elements, and then the objects node is what you use to map portions of that image into the control elements you want to render. Below those nodes, and this is in the bitmap designer, there's the fonts and the colors and the sys colors nodes. And you need to go into those when designing your color, because the fonts one in particular is what you use to specify the color of the font that is used for each of the different states of the element. So there's going to be a button normal state, and what color font do you want to use? So obviously, if you have a darker colored image that you're using for a button, you'll want to go into that entry and make that a lighter color font. But then you also have to do the same for the button down state, the button hot state, and the button disabled state. So you have quite a bit of flexibility in doing that. And there's a whole bunch of different control element states that display text that for completeness you need to go through. And that's one of the things you have to watch out for, because some of the styles simply do a recoloring and they don't have all the font values set up. And so you might get a mismatch of text disappearing on a color, for example.
Oh, okay. How does styles work with third-party components?
It all depends on the third-party component. If a third-party component supports the Windows styles, which most have done for quite a while, they should be able to support custom styles pretty easily. It's essentially the same interface that's used, which makes it nice. There are a couple things that vendors need to watch for, and that is if your custom control is purely custom, where it doesn't have a direct map to a Windows control or a control element, it may be using the style or the system color values as an equivalent. Mm-hmm. And so you want to make sure that the style is set up correctly so that those render themselves right. But if you do have a problem with a third-party control, contact the vendor, and I'm sure they'll be able to address that.
So if they're completely drawing it themselves, then how would they deal with that?
The easiest way is to either find a control element that maps to what they're trying to do, or they find an equivalent color value. Like if they need to do a background image, they may end up pulling the background color used for a panel.
Okay.
That matches closely to what they want, or they could simply use a system color value, getting the equivalent of what the button face color is.
Okay, that makes sense. Since the system colors should be updated to match the new style, then
yes.
Yeah. Okay. Here's a question here. It says, if I create a component dynamically at runtime by programming, is there a way to apply the style to make it work? For example, with the pop-up menu. So I think if you put a style, if you create a button at runtime and put it on the form, it gets the style automatically, doesn't it?
It does. The first part of the question was what I don't is dynamically changing the style at runtime. Is it meaning that they want to actually change the style itself, or just switching to a new style?
I think it's if I create a component dynamically at runtime.
Oh, creating component dynamically. Yes, that will it will immediately pick up whatever current VCL style is active, as long as it's been designed to look and use the elements of that style.
Okay. And we're about out of time here. One last question. Is it possible to include gray patterns in the styles for those that are colorblind and aren't able to differentiate colors?
I think I've not tried that. Because the control itself is simply a PNG image, you should be able to set that image up in whatever color patterning that you wanted to use. You could really make a high contrast VCL style that was very, basic.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it should be possible to accomplish that.
Okay. And actually, I got one last question here. It's a good one. How does styles interoperate with using native elements that were introduced with 10 Seattle? If somebody tells that they want to use a native edit box instead of a styled edit box.
Well, it sounds like the question is a little bit more towards like the FireMonkey styles.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, FireMonkey styles. Yep, you're right.
So it's a different technique for that. It doesn't really apply in the VCL style side because, again, it's all the edit controls, if they're connected to those that VCL style element, whether it's the Windows version from Windows 10 or earlier, or a Windows 10 style that's running under Windows 7, which you can do with XE8 and 10 Seattle. That you can't really change that out. That's what's rendering gets used.
Okay, great. Thank you, Ray, for another fabulous session.